The preemptive attack by the Mississippi Territorial Volunteers at Burnt Corn Creek ignited a conflict guaranteed to set the U.S. frontiers on fire. And the defeat of the volunteer soldiers by Peter McQueen's Red Stick Warriors signaled others in the Creek Nation that the power of the prophet Josiah Francis and his followers was strong.
Well, Creek culture of those days was very much like the Scott-Irish culture of those days, and very much like culture going all the way back through biblical times. It was an eye for an eye culture. And when Peter McQueen and his warriors returned from the Battle of Burnt Corn Creek, and they passed the news around that they had lost some of their warriors to this attack on them by the Mississippi Territorial Volunteers, well, the families of those warriors who were slain in the battle were irate, and they called out for vengeance, and that left the prophet Francis and the other leaders of his movement with little choice but to strike back against those who had attacked them.
The story was different in the settlements along the frontier north of Mobile. Terrified families fled their homes and farms, seeking safety in numbers. Forts and blockhouses went up at key points. There were no regular soldiers in the region. Volunteers and militia were few, but they tried to protect as many people as possible. East of the Mobile-Tensas Delta, one key point quickly emerged: Fort Mims.
It's listed on the National Register of Historic Sites, and it's an Alabama historical site, and it's open daylight to dark, and we have a pavilion, and there's a recording that tells the history of the area at the time, and also it tells about what happened here at Fort Mims. And so people can come out, bring their picnic lunch, look at the blockhouse, the stockade, read the signs and kiosks that we have that tell the story of Fort Mims. And we have a lot of people who come through just to sit when we don't have an event. And it's really quiet, it's beautiful, and it's way out in the swamp. You can just hear the birds and the hawks overhead. So it's a beautiful place, and we hope everybody will come and remember Fort Mims.
Little more than a rough stockade of logs thrown up around the home of Samuel Mims, the fort had only one unfinished blockhouse. It was poorly designed, with no outer ditch or moat, and loopholes were cut so low that attackers on the outside could fire through them just as easily as defenders on the inside.
This massive army of Red Stick warriors, somewhere between 750 and maybe even 1,250 in number, set out down the east side of the Alabama River. They engaged in a little psychological warfare, that's true. They spread out rumors as to where they were going to keep the frontier settlers, completely confused as to what the target might be, but the target all along was Fort Mims. As they went south, they carried with them, or voluntarily along with them went, some of the white traders, the deerskin traders in the nation. We know this because one of these traders actually penned a letter for them immediately following the attack to the Spanish governor in Pensacola, describing what happened at Fort Mims and indicating he was present along with some of the others.
Among the people gathered at Fort Mims were some of the very men involved in the attack on Peter McQueen's supply party at Burnt Corn Creek. Their families and friends were there too. Those who held African Americans in bondage took their slaves into the fort with them.
Once people in America became aware of what was happening, you've had this massive uproar to put down this Creek rebellion, and in truth the Creeks were fighting among themselves before it ever involved America. So it was a really complex event that exposed a lot of things that were happening on the frontier, and its impact is that it really changed this entire Deep South area and really charted its way towards the development of what we know as the Cotton Kingdom, and preceded the events that led to the Civil War.
The Red Sticks waited quietly through the hot morning of August 30th, 1813. They were so close that they could see people coming and going from Fort Mims. But Major Daniel Beasley, the commander of the fort, did not even close the gates. In fact, he ordered the beating of an enslaved African American who tried to warn him that the Red Sticks were coming.
The emotions felt are indescribable.
They were the feelings of a father for the loss of many children. The attack was made on Major Beasley at 11 o'clock a.m. of the 30th. It was sudden and unexpected at the moment, but the whole garrison were instantly under arms. The front gate was open, and the enemy ran in a body to possess themselves of it. The slaughter was great on both sides. The Indians at last possessed themselves of part of the post. They fought with a determination and bravery unexampled. George Daughtry, Ensign, 1st Regiment Mississippi Territorial Volunteers, September 4th, 1813.
The Creek warriors used fence rails to plug many of the portholes through which the defenders were firing, then stormed the Fort Mims blockhouse. Captain William Jack's company of defenders tried to hold them back, but was too outnumbered, and the blockhouse fell.
From the houses our troops made a most gallant defense, but the enemy set fire to the roofs, and an attempt to extinguish the flames proved unsuccessful. The few who remained now attempted a retreat under the direction of Captain Bailey of the militia and Ensign Chambliss of the rifle company, both of whom had been badly wounded. Previously to their retreat, they threw into the flames many of the guns of the dead men. Few of them succeeded in escaping. Brigadier General Ferdinand L. Claiborne, commanding 7th Military District, September 3, 1813.
The Red Sticks made prisoners of more survivors than the frontier officers thought at the time, especially African Americans and women and children of Métis, or mixed European and Native American ancestry. By the end of the day, more than 250 men, women, and children died in Fort Mims, and most of the fort was burnt to the ground. The number of Red Sticks killed and wounded in the attack remains a topic of dispute to this day. Some writers place the number in the hundreds. Others say that only a few dozen lost their lives. Also disputed is the leadership of the Red Stick force that attacked Fort Mims. Many white historians credit, or blame, depending on their point of view, William Weatherford, while also claiming that the Prophet Francis was too afraid to take part in the attack. Documents from Spanish and British archives, however, tell a different story.
The British and Spanish archives provide a great deal of information about the attack on Fort Mims from the Native American or Red Stick viewpoint. The British archives, for example, include reports from Lieutenant Colonel Edward Nichols of the Royal Marines. Now, he arrived on the Gulf Coast the following year, 1 year after the attack, as part of the British invasion of the Gulf Coast region. And he had the opportunity to discuss this attack with many of the Red Stick chiefs and warriors who were there. And they told him that not only did the Prophet Francis help plan the attack, but he was actually engaged or involved in the attack at Fort Mims. He also learned that some of the first people or warriors involved in storming Fort Mims were the Maroons, or escaped slaves, who had escaped from the families who lived immediately around the fort. That is a very different story than has been told by many historians who have written about Fort Mims, and it's an important facet that should be told as part of the story. Also, the Spanish archives or Spanish documents include a fascinating letter that was written to the governor at Pensacola by a number of the principal leaders, Red Stick leaders, of the attack on Fort Mims. This letter was written immediately after the attack, before these leaders had returned to the Holy Ground. And among these leaders was the Prophet Francis.
That letter, written immediately after the attack, tells the Creek version of the battle for Fort Mims.
3 person in number that has been informed from the Spirit above to take the war club in hand, we have give our talk out to the nation and have taken the talk, and whole Creek nation is united and taken up the Red Stick. As the power we received was to fight the Americans, the interpreter's son headed an army and went against a garrison at Kennesaw, and he put the garrison in flames. 499 of the enemies was slain, 243 Negroes taken prisoner, 330 horses taken. 30 men was killed by the enemies. 7 out of the 30 was killed by our own people by bad conduct. We hold you fast by the hand. We tell you no lie, the true statement of things. Josiah Francis, the Old King, Old Interpreter, Malgiwichi. August 1813.
The fall of Fort Mims was soon followed by a second battle, one in which hunting dogs helped save the occupants of another frontier fort. That story when our series, War of 1812 on the Gulf Coast, continues. At Fort Mims State Historic Site in Tensall, Alabama, I'm Rachel Conrad for 2 Egg TV.